Well, I've been with the Jenesse Center for many, many years. I started as an intern, actually, many years ago with the Rosa Parks Sexual Assault Center, and that's how I found the Jenesse Center. Those two agencies worked hand in hand back in the day when there were very few services for South Central. I'm currently the Family Services Director, and my primary role is to train graduate students on how to service the women and children at the agency.
My name is Priscilla O'Chen, and I'm a professor at Loyola Law School here in Los Angeles. And I came to know Jenesse maybe a year ago after I was contacted by Karen, who I think had been introduced to some of my work on women of color who have been incarcerated. And I had been doing work on incarcerated women, particularly Black women, for a number of years, first as a civil rights attorney and then as a professor. And one of the things that I discovered in doing that work is that most of the women who are incarcerated are also survivors. I think it's something like 80 to 90% of incarcerated women have been victims of either physical or sexual abuse before the age of 18. And many of them are incarcerated for things that they do to survive. Coping mechanisms like drug use or property crimes. And so working with Jenesse not only gives me an opportunity to be aligned with an organization, with people who are intervening early, but in doing so in non-punitive ways, in ways that are therapeutic and imbue women with dignity and hope. So I'm really honored to be here and to be on this panel with you.
Hi, I'm Leslie Feldman. I come from it from a completely different way, I think, than you all do, because I've known Hallie for, I hate to say it, well over 20 years, because I'm casting director and we have worked together. And I got to know, I knew Hallie was special, I have to say, as soon as I met her, not because she's so beautiful on the outside, but because her inner beauty really attracted me to her. And I knew that she was a really special person, and I know that she's so dedicated to Jenesse. I've seen her, on the site, personally giving her own money. I've seen her just last year get on a plane with a brand new baby to fly someplace just because she was told if she made an appearance there, the sponsor of this event would give a gigantic donation to Jenesse. She's always there for it. And I came to become involved because my sister, who's here tonight too, is also friendly with Hallie, went down to the center. My daughter was in high school and needed to do a project, and we thought, oh, maybe she'll do a little help at Jenesse. So we went down on a Saturday about 5 years ago, met Karen Earl, and I'll say, watch out if she talks to you tonight, because we walked in and we thought, oh, maybe Laura will do a little painting and maybe work there a few weekends, and within 10 minutes or less, she had us committed to completely renovating and decorating a huge 2-bedroom apartment. And we walked out a little shell-shocked, like, what have we committed to? How do we know how to do this? But we were also so inspired by Karen and by Hallie. And it took a little longer than we thought, but we did our apartment, and then we decided, wait a little while, went back to Karen and said, I think we're ready to do another apartment. And so Karen, in her way, said, oh, that's so nice. You do whatever you want, but you know what we really need? So we said, okay, we'll go a little bigger this time. And this time now we're inches away from completing the Octavia Spencer Learning Center at the site. And the reason, we all know that there's so much need everywhere and so many worthy organizations, but what I loved about this was what I learned from Hallie, and also Karen's dedication to getting rid of domestic violence in our lifetime, and just seeing that this is a place where you can raise money and ask people for money, and you see that every penny goes to exactly what they talked about, and we're so proud to be part of it.
And you know what, to piggyback off that, what's so hard about this cause, it's very unsympathetic in a way, and sadly people say, well, they ought to just leave. People don't really understand, if it were just that simple, everybody would just leave. but they don't understand the psychology behind it, why that's so hard, and how this dynamic gets set up. They don't understand how the children might as well be children dying of cancer. Those children people feel really sympathetic about and have no trouble writing a check. But you bring up a child of domestic violence, and they just don't see it the same way. But it's the same thing. These babies are dying. These children are dying. And if not physically, they are emotionally and spiritually dying. And they grow up to be our deadened adults. And that is death, no matter how you look at it. And these kids are just as valuable and just as important as these children that are dying from all these other diseases that are out of their control. This isn't in their control either, but somehow people think it's within their control. And it's really not that simple.
Yeah, they didn't choose it. They had nothing to do with it. But also what's so special about what you do is not just offer shelter, that you offer all these other ways to give them a path to find a different way to live. And we've seen so many kids there and seen them become so happy and more confident. And, you know, hopefully all of these other things that we're still able to do will keep it going even more. But yeah, and I mean, I'm here just, you need more help, and we'll do anything we can to help you to continue it.
I mean, you're absolutely right, Hallie. The children are the ones that are affected the most, and the mothers often are so concerned about the safety, they often miss the children, if you know what I mean. They're concerned about, where am I going to go? What am I going to do? And they're not able to necessarily attend to the emotional needs of the children. But when we bring them into the shelter and they can actually breathe and relax and sit and know that we are comforting them, and we are able to give them those tools and teach them how to attend to their children, it is remarkable to see how that changes. Our interns are able to offer them the group services and play therapy and musical therapy and movement therapy. The children are bottled up, and they're able to open the children up to give them some expression, because the children have learned how not to speak, how to be in the corner, how to go away and just be silent, and they're bottled up. But then also we recognize that children at school, what does that look like? We've seen that at school. They act out often, right? You see that child at school that's not able to self-regulate. Well, often that's because that pain and confusion, they're bottled up. So having a place like Jenesse where the women are able to work together with their children to help them express their feelings. The women often don't know how to express their feelings. They grew up in often similar homes. So they're learning a new language about themselves and about their children. And we're trying to keep another generation of non-communication of feelings and emotions. So it's actually a wonderful opportunity for our interns to have, for the women, and the women to have that experience with their children.
And sometimes the women too, well, most of the time, the women, they're living in these situations, they're so dependent on the man because they've never worked, they don't have an education, and so they feel, if I do leave, well, what am I going to do? And at Jenesse, they get vocational training, they learn skills, we help them get into community colleges, we teach them how to get grants and loans and fill out all the forms, things that are so intimidating for them, but if someone just helps them, and like I said, you know better, you do better, show them the way, they really do want to help themselves, they just don't really know how. That's what I found. They just don't know how, and they just need to be taught and taken by the hand. And then once you do that, you see them take off when they graduate from a program, how proud they are and how happy they are and how they want to help the next mother that they knew, and they feel so accomplished, and it makes them start to feel like, how could I ever have lived like that? I've heard some of them say, how could I ever have devalued myself so much? But it happens. It's happening.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and many of our mothers are tied up in the court system because of the experience of the domestic violence. They're caught up in the court system, and through Jenesse, we're able to help them through that process. Our legal department is very instrumental in helping them through that process. We write the court letters that are necessary to say, yes, they're here, they're in their mental health services, and those kinds of things. So that's another piece that they're caught up in that we're able to help them
and actually help them get divorces, because they're even afraid of that. They want a divorce, but they're afraid of all that will entail. And they figure that they're just going to get sort of pummeled by the system. So that's another reason they don't even venture down that avenue. And Jenesse helps them, take their hand and helps them, figure their way through that process, which is daunting.
I think
Yeah,
too is it's. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh,
So I wanted to sort of jump in here and highlight some of the things that were just mentioned, sort of the broader social dynamics that make women vulnerable. So, we know that all women are vulnerable to domestic violence, but not all women have the resources that they need to be able to leave. Poverty is a significant determinant in terms of who is vulnerable to domestic violence and being sort of forced to stay in situations that are obviously not healthy, and then being subject to trauma that affects how they see themselves, how they behave in the world, and not being able to get in touch with legal systems or law enforcement that can actually support them. In many ways, people are afraid of contacting law enforcement because they're afraid that will make things more difficult for their children, if CPS gets involved, right? Or if they leave and they're homeless, being subject to losing their children. So they're between a rock and a hard place. So having resources and having the resources that Jenesse provides is quite significant when women don't think that they have champions or advocates in the legal system. It isolates them. And they can be subject to a lot of various forms of violence that can lead to death. So Jenesse is literally saving women's lives. For Black women, intimate partner death is among the top 10 of the leading killers of Black women. So I just think we ought to recognize the literally life-saving work that Jenesse is doing, especially when our legal systems often fail the most vulnerable women in our communities, particularly in South LA.
Oh yeah, well, I was just going to say, I also feel like I think, and if you still do this, it's also wonderful that they know they are there with you for a certain amount of time. I don't know if it's still 2 years, because it sets them on the path to know that they have a certain amount of time that they have to do. They have to take advantage of all of these things that you're offering, and know, because they're not there forever. So you're not only helping them, but you're pushing them really to learn to take care of themselves and take care of their families, and make that better life for themselves.
And what's really great about Jenesse too is Jenesse will allow you to come back. There's shelters that once you go through the program, you're through and no coming back. What I love about Jenesse is Jenesse says, I know you're human. You can make mistakes. I don't know the statistics, but I know how many women fail and come back, and on the second try, they get it right. And if you shut the door and you didn't let those women come back, I shudder when I think about it. We don't get it right the first time, and they shouldn't be penalized because they don't get it right. They didn't get in this situation overnight. We can't expect them to totally transform. And I love that Jenesse allows them to come back.
How we're able to do that is with the clinical staff. The clinical staff and the fabulous Dr. Kennedy. You want to talk about that?
Well, how fabulous I am?
Yeah, do it.
No, I wanted to go to that next level when you talked about faking it till we make it, that next level. Because when the women, you just said they didn't get here overnight. So the next step, just because they are able to move out in 2 years, yes, we do take them back if they need to. But I think the other piece that we want to grow into is, how do I live my life afterwards? Mm-hmm. You taught me how to get away from this one, or how to protect myself, but I still don't really know how to be in a relationship. I still don't know how to co-parent. There's still a father to my children somewhere, and I still need to know how to deal with that. I still need to know how to date. I still need to know what to do with the next level, the next phase of my life. And that's way beyond a shelter. That is about really living a life. And if we don't have a place for women to come and have that dialogue, I think we've missed the boat. I think we've just kind of, okay, next, we put a Band-Aid on it, right? Because it's much more important to talk about this next phase and relationships, because self-empowerment is one thing, but working with someone else is a whole nother thing. That is the hardest thing to do. Yes. Shut me
Mic
down. No. No, right? So I think that that's part of our next phase, that when Ms. Earl talks about how we want to grow, it really is to talk about this next phase beyond the domestic violence. How do I live my life in relationship to some other person, some other adult that I want to connect with, and raise children at the same time? I think that that's another piece we want to add on to.
Yeah, one of the things that I really appreciate about Jenesse, as I've learned more and more about the work that they do, is pushing this beyond the individual framework and seeing this as a broader social problem of violence. People grow up in ecosystems of violence, where intimate partner violence is just one piece of that. And so part of what Jenesse is doing is trying to address all of the sort of tributaries that contribute to violence, which is about shelter, it's about housing, it's about education, it's about employment. When you think about the resources that women of color have, the little resources that women of color have, it's not surprising that women are often unable to leave. So I just want to give you two statistics. Black women have a net worth, that is how much resources they have on average, of negative $100, right? That's, and in contrast to white women who are at about, I think it's $50,000. Latinas are at about $50, right? So if you are in a situation where you have a negative $100, can you leave? Can you get an apartment? Can you go to school? Right? And then we also have a broader ecosystem of misogyny that promotes violence against women, right? So if you grow up in a society that devalues women, then we don't see violence against women as a problem. So Jenesse stands up to that and pushes back and pushes for state interventions to approach this like a public health problem. Right? Violence is everyone's responsibility, not just the responsibility of the person who's being affected by the violence.